The Draconian Empire wasn't just big. It was massive. 12 whole star systems bowed to Emperor Kale, and everyone knew the rules. If you could breathe fire, you mattered. If you couldn't, well, you were basically furniture. Prince Torvan knew this better than anyone. He was the youngest of 7 princes, and while his brothers could turn entire battlefields into ash, Torvan could barely manage a few pathetic sparks. On a good day, he might light a candle. On a bad day, nothing but smoke and embarrassment. The palace was enormous, all gleaming towers and golden halls that stretched for miles. Torvan had stopped walking through the main corridors months ago. The stairs hurt worse than any insult. Servants would see him coming and suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. His brothers didn't even bother mocking him anymore. They just pretended he didn't exist. Every evening, Torvan would slip out to the Eastern Garden. It wasn't the fancy one where his father held state dinners. This was a quiet corner with old stone benches and overgrown flowers that nobody bothered to trim anymore. He'd sit there for hours, watching his brothers practice combat drills in the sky above the palace. They were magnificent. Fire trailing behind them like comets, their roars shaking the very air. Sometimes the younger nobles would gather on balconies to watch, cheering and placing bets on who could fly fastest or burn brightest. Torvan wondered what it felt like to have people look at you like that. Like you were worth something. Danny Mitchell had been working the night shift at the palace for almost 2 years. He was from Earth, part of the human contingent that handled maintenance and cleaning. The pay was decent, and it meant his daughter Amy could stay in a good school back home. He didn't mind the work. Pushing a cleaning cart through silent halls at night gave him time to think. He'd noticed the young prince about 6 months back. Always sitting alone in that forgotten garden, always watching the sky with this look on his face that Danny recognized. His daughter got that same look sometimes when kids at school made fun of her reading. For weeks, Danny just nodded politely when he'd pass by with his cart. The kid would nod back, and that was it. But one night, Danny noticed the prince's shoulders were shaking. Not crying, exactly. Just this quiet kind of despair that made Danny's chest hurt. He parked his cart and walked over. "Mind if I sit? My feet are killing me." The prince looked startled. Dragons didn't usually show surprise well, but Torvan's silver eyes went wide. "You want to sit with me?" "Bench is here." "I'm here." Seems logical. Danny sat down with a grunt and pulled out his battered thermos. "Coffee. It's an Earth thing. Tastes like burnt dirt, but we drink it anyway. Makes no sense, but that's humans for you." Torvan didn't know what to say. Nobody had voluntarily sat with him in months. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Danny took a sip and considered this. "Should I be? You planning to eat me or something?" "I'm a prince of the Draconian Empire. And I'm a janitor from Cleveland. We're both just people sitting on a bench." Danny looked up at the dragons wheeling through the night sky. "Those your brothers up there?" "Yes." The word came out flat. "They're pretty good. Lots of flash. Very impressive." Danny was quiet for a moment. "You know what's funny? Back on Earth, we've got this thing called fireworks. Explosions of color and light. Everybody loves them. But you know what people remember years later? Not the fireworks. The conversations they had while watching them. The people they were with." Torvan turned to look at this strange human. "Are you saying my brothers are just fireworks?" "I'm saying fire is loud. But loud isn't the same as important." Danny screwed the cap back on his thermos. "My daughter Amy, she's got this learning disability. Reading is really hard for her. For a long time, she thought that made her stupid. Then one day, a new kid showed up at school. Didn't speak English. Was terrified. All the smart kids ignored him. But Amy, she sat with him every day at lunch. Learned to draw pictures to communicate. By the end of the year, that kid was thriving, and Amy had taught half the class some basic sign language she'd invented." "What's your point?" Torvan asked, but his voice wasn't hostile. Just curious. "Point is, everybody was measuring Amy by how fast she could read. But they were using the wrong ruler. She's got gifts they don't. Understanding. Compassion. The ability to see people who are invisible to everyone else." Danny stood up and grabbed his cart. "Same might be true for you, kid. Maybe you're just being measured wrong." After that night, Danny would stop by the garden whenever he saw Torvan there. Sometimes they'd talk for hours. Danny told stories about Earth, about cities with millions of humans all crammed together, about oceans and mountains and this thing called pizza that Danny swore was the greatest invention in human history. Torvan soaked it all in. He learned that on Earth, leaders weren't always the strongest. That humans valued something called democracy, where everyone got a voice. That they had people called teachers and doctors and engineers who were respected not for their power but for their knowledge and compassion. We had a president once, Danny said one night, guy named Jimmy Carter. After he was president, you know what he did? Built houses for poor people. With his own hands. One of the most powerful men in our world, and he spent his later years holding a hammer, making sure people had roofs over their heads. That would be considered shameful here, Torvan said quietly. A leader doing manual labor. Yeah, well, we thought it was pretty great. Real strength isn't about what you can destroy, kid. It's about what you can build. What you can protect. Who you can help. 3 months passed like this. Danny would clean, and Torvan would wait in the garden, and slowly the prince began to smile again. Danny taught him card tricks during their talks. Simple stuff that made Torvan laugh when he messed them up. The prince had a good laugh, Danny thought. Warm and genuine. He should use it more often. Then one morning, the announcement came. The emperor had summoned the entire palace to the throne room. Even the night shift workers were required to attend. Danny stood in the back with the other humans while Emperor Kale's voice boomed through the massive chamber. The Galactic Council was coming. The trials of ascension would prove which prince was worthy to be heir. Each son would demonstrate their power before the assembled galaxies. Danny watched Torvan's face drain of color. The young prince stood with his brothers, but he looked like he might collapse. When the ceremony ended and everyone filed out, Torvan disappeared into the crowd. Danny found him 2 hours later in a storage room deep in the palace, behind old furniture and forgotten equipment. The prince was curled up, shaking. Hey, buddy. Danny squeezed into the cramped space. Talk to me. I can't do this, Torvan whispered. I'll humiliate my father. The entire galaxy will see how weak I am. My brothers will breathe fire that reaches the stars, and I'll stand there like a broken thing that can barely spark. Danny sat with him in the darkness for a long moment. Then he pulled out his wallet and showed Torvan the picture he always carried. Amy, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth and eyes full of joy. 3 days, Danny said. We've got 3 days. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you some Earth magic. And you're going to remember that you're more than what your father thinks you should be. The next morning, the palace felt different. Torvan could feel it the moment he walked through the corridors. There was this electric tension in the air, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Servants rushed past carrying banners and decorations. Guards stood straighter. Even the marble floors seemed to shine brighter. His brothers were already in the training grounds when Torvan passed by. Vorton, the eldest, was showing off for a crowd of visiting dignitaries. He breathed a column of fire so hot it turned the stone targets white. The crowd gasped and applauded. Vorton bowed, soaking in the attention like he was born for it. Torvan kept walking. No point watching something that would only make him feel worse. He found Danny that afternoon in one of the service hallways. The human was organizing cleaning supplies, humming some Earth song that Torvan had heard a dozen times but still didn't understand the words to. You okay? Danny asked, not looking up from his work. No. Torvan slumped against the wall. The trials are in 3 days. 3 days, Danny. And I've been practicing all morning. I managed sparks. Just sparks. My youngest brother is 12 and he can melt steel. Danny finished stacking bottles and turned around. Come with me. I've got something to show you. They walked through the palace's maze of back corridors, the ones only staff members knew about. Danny led him to a small break room where human workers took their meals. It was empty now, just a few tables and chairs and a window looking out over the city. Sit, Danny said, pulling out a deck of cards. We're going to try something different. Cards? Danny, I don't think magic tricks are going to help me breathe fire. Just trust me. Danny shuffled the deck with practiced ease. This is a basic trick. Pick a card, any card. Torvan sighed but played along. He picked one. 7 of hearts, whatever that meant. Now put it back in the deck. Danny shuffled again, then spread the cards face down on the table. Point to one. Torvan pointed randomly. Danny flipped it over. 7 of hearts. How did you? Magic, Danny said with a grin. Okay, not really. It's just technique. Misdirection. Making people look where you want them to look instead of where the truth is. He gathered up the cards. Your father and brothers, they're all focused on fire. That's where everyone's looking. But what if that's not where the real power is? I don't understand. Danny leaned back in his chair. Let me tell you about my daughter Amy again. Last year, her school had this big science fair. All the kids were supposed to do projects. Most of them did volcanoes or solar systems, you know, the flashy stuff. Amy's teacher suggested she do something simple because of her reading issues. Something easy. What did she do? Torvan asked. She interviewed every janitor, cafeteria worker, and bus driver at her school. Wrote down their stories. Where they came from, what their dreams were, why they chose their jobs. Then she made this huge display with photos and quotes. Called it the invisible people who make our school work. Danny's eyes got a little watery. Kid, you should have seen it. Grown adults crying as they read about themselves. Students learning the names of people they'd walked past for years without really seeing. Amy didn't win first place. Some kid with a robot won that. But the principal created a special award just for her project. Called it the Compassion Prize. I still don't see how this helps me, Torvan said quietly. The other kids tried to compete on flash and spectacle. Amy competed on a completely different field. She played a game nobody else was even aware existed. Danny started shuffling the cards again. Maybe you can't win at breathing fire. But maybe that's not the only game happening here. They spent the next 2 hours working on card tricks and coin illusions. Simple stuff that required steady hands and patience. Torvan was terrible at first, dropping cards everywhere, fumbling the coins. But Danny was patient, showing him over and over until his claws could manage the delicate movements. Why are we really doing this? Torvan asked as he finally managed to make a coin disappear and reappear. Because I want you to feel what it's like to succeed at something. Even something small. Even something silly. Danny collected the coins. And because I want you to remember that there are different kinds of power in the universe. That evening, Torvan was summoned to a family dinner. These were rare and always uncomfortable. His father sat at the head of the massive table, with his 7 sons arranged by age on either side. Torvan was at the far end, practically in the next room. Emperor Kale talked strategy with Vorten and the older brothers. Military campaigns, territorial disputes, trade negotiations that were really just veiled threats. The conversation flowed around Torvan like he wasn't even there. Halfway through the meal, his brother Dracos brought up the trials. Father, I've been working on a new technique. I can sustain a flame column for 30 seconds now. The Galactic Council will be amazed. Excellent, the Emperor rumbled. Show them the full might of our bloodline. Another brother chimed in. I've coordinated a flight display with Vorten. We'll create a double helix of fire that spirals into the clouds. They all started talking at once, each trying to one-up the others with descriptions of their planned demonstrations. The noise was overwhelming. Torvan focused on his plate and tried to become invisible, which wasn't hard. He'd had years of practice. Then his father's voice cut through the chatter. Torvan. The table went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. Yes, father? What do you plan to demonstrate? The Emperor's tone wasn't cruel, exactly. Just tired. Like he was fulfilling an obligation by asking. Torvan's mind went blank. He thought about Danny's card tricks, about Amy's science project, about invisible people and different kinds of power. None of it seemed to matter in this moment, facing his father's ancient eyes. I don't know yet, he managed. The silence stretched out. Then Vorten laughed, and the other brothers joined in. Even the servants standing along the walls looked uncomfortable. Perhaps you could demonstrate how to polish armor, Draco suggested. Or count inventory. Find something suited to your talents. More laughter. The Emperor didn't join in, but he didn't stop it either. He just looked at Torvan with something that might have been pity or might have been disappointment. With his father, it was hard to tell the difference. Torvan excused himself before dessert. Nobody tried to stop him. He went straight to the eastern garden and waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, he heard the familiar squeak of Danny's cleaning cart wheels. Rough dinner? Danny asked, sitting down beside him. How did you know? You've got that look. Like someone just told you everything you already believed about yourself. Danny pulled out his thermos. Want to talk about it? What's the point? In 3 days, I'm going to stand in front of the entire Galactic Council and prove that I'm exactly what my family thinks I am. Weak. Useless. A mistake. Danny took a long sip of coffee. You know what I think? I think you're scared. And that's okay. Being scared is normal. But you're letting that fear tell you who you are. I can't breathe fire, Danny. That's not fear. That's just fact. Sure. But here's another fact. You know the names of every servant in this palace. You asked them about their families. Last week, I heard you helped old Petra carry supplies up 4 flights of stairs. You didn't have to do that. Princes don't do that. But you did. That's not power, Torvan said bitterly. Maybe not the kind your father recognizes. But it's power just the same. Danny stood up and grabbed his card. Get some sleep, kid. Tomorrow, we're going to work on your real demonstration. Not fire tricks or flight displays. Something better. We're going to work on your voice. The morning of the trials arrived with artificial sunshine flooding the council arena. The structure was massive, an open-air stadium that could hold 50,000 beings from across the galaxy. Atmospheric shields shimmered overhead, protecting the crowd from the vacuum of space while giving everyone a perfect view of the stars beyond. Danny stood in the servants section, squeezed between other human workers and maintenance staff from a dozen different species. His cleaning uniform suddenly felt too tight. He'd never seen this many important people in one place. Ambassadors, military leaders, trade representatives, all gathered to watch 7 dragon princes prove their worth. The arena floor was pure white sand imported from some desert planet. It would show the scorch marks beautifully, Danny thought. Everything about this place was designed for spectacle. Torvan was somewhere in the preparation chambers beneath the arena. Danny had tried to see him that morning, but the royal family was in seclusion. He'd left a note with one of the guards. Just 3 words, remember who you are. The crowd noise was deafening. Species that communicated through clicks and whistles mixed with the deep rumbles of stone-based life forms and the high-pitched chirps of the insectoid delegates. Translator devices struggled to keep up with dozens of languages all happening at once. Then Emperor Kale entered his viewing box, and everything went silent. The Emperor looked exactly like what he was, ancient power wrapped in crimson scales. He didn't speak, didn't wave. Just sat down on his throne, and that was enough. The trials would begin. A Galactic Council official stepped onto the sand. Her name was Ambassador Wells, a human woman who'd risen through Earth's diplomatic corps to represent their entire planet. Danny felt a small surge of pride seeing her there. Honored guests, her voice boomed through the arena's speakers. We gather to witness the trials of ascension. 7 princes will demonstrate their power. The Emperor will choose his heir. Let the trials begin. The first prince emerged from the tunnel. Vorton, the eldest, spread his wings and launched into the sky. What followed was 10 minutes of pure destruction. He didn't just breathe fire, he created storms of it. Tornadoes of flame that turned the white sand to pools of glass. The heat was so intense that even with the atmospheric shields, Danny felt sweat running down his back. When Vorton landed, the crowd went absolutely wild. The applause lasted 3 full minutes. The second prince was almost as impressive. He focused on precision rather than raw power, creating shapes out of fire, dragons, ships, even a reasonable sculpture of the Emperor himself. The artistic control was stunning. One by one, Torvan's brothers took the arena floor. Each demonstration was more elaborate than the last. The fourth prince created a fire that burned underwater, which shouldn't have been possible. The fifth prince flew so high he became just a dot, then dove while trailing flames that painted the sky like a comet. Danny's stomach twisted tighter with each performance. How was Torvan supposed to follow this? Finally, after nearly 2 hours of displays that seemed to redefine what dragons could do, the announcer called the final name. Prince Torvan, 7th son of Emperor Kale. The applause was polite but noticeably quieter. Danny heard whispers around him. The weak one. Can he even breathe fire? Why is he even here? Torvan walked onto the sand, and Danny's heart broke a little. The young prince looked so small compared to his brothers. His silver scales didn't have that crimson brilliance. His wings seemed almost fragile in comparison. But he walked with his head up. That was something. Torvan moved to the center of the arena. The crowd waited. He opened his mouth, and Danny could see him concentrating with everything he had. Come on, kid. You've got this. A few sparks flickered out. Orange and weak, like a lighter running out of fluid. Then nothing. Torvan tried again. More sparks, slightly bigger this time, but they died in the air before reaching the ground. The silence in the arena was worse than any insult. It was the sound of 40,000 beings all thinking the same thing. This is pathetic. Danny looked up at the Emperor's box. Kale's face had gone completely blank. Not angry. Just empty. Like he was watching a stranger embarrass themselves and trying to pretend it wasn't happening. Torvan stood alone in the center of the arena, and Danny could see his shoulders starting to shake. The prince was going to break. Right here, in front of everyone. No. Not happening. Danny started clapping. Slow and steady, his hands making the only sound in the entire massive arena. People turned to stare at him. A few humans looked at him like he'd lost his mind. But Danny kept clapping. Then Beth, a human engineer he worked with, stood up and joined him. Her claps echoed his rhythm. Then Miguel from the kitchen staff. Then Rachel and Tom from maintenance. The human section rose as one, applauding steadily. It spread to the Thalaxians, a species known for their appreciation of courage over power. A few Verdani delegates stood, their forearms creating a complex rhythm of support. It wasn't a majority. Maybe a quarter of the arena at most. But it was enough. Torvan looked up into the stands and found Danny's face. Their eyes met across the distance. Danny nodded once. Do it. Say what you came to say. The young prince took a breath and stepped forward. His voice carried clearly through the arena speakers. Honored council, you've witnessed fire today. Power that can reshape landscapes and burn through solid stone. These are the traditional strengths of my people, and I respect them deeply. He paused, and Danny could see him gathering courage. But I stand before you to offer something different. I cannot burn the sky like my brothers. I cannot create flames that reach the clouds. What I can do is walk through the palace halls where servants work, and I know their names. I know that Petra has 3 children on the outer colonies who she hasn't seen in 2 years because she can't afford transport. I know that the Verdani kitchen staff work double shifts because we're short-staffed, but nobody above ground notices. The crowd had gone quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. People were actually listening. I've spent the last year studying the diplomatic reports that crossed my father's desk, Torvan continued, his voice growing stronger. I know that the Centauri system is facing famine because of drought. That the mining colonies on Kepler 442b are on the verge of revolt because of unsafe working conditions. That 3 species have filed formal complaints about draconian military aggression in neutral zones. Now Emperor Kale was leaning forward in his box, really looking at his son for what might be the first time. The galaxy has enough fire, Torvan said, and his voice rang with conviction. Enough weapons, enough threats, enough shows of force. What we need are leaders who will listen. Who will protect the weak instead of conquering them. Who understand that real strength isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you're willing to protect. He looked directly at his father. I may be the weakest of your sons in traditional measures. But I know something they don't. I know that every life in this empire matters. From the highest noble to the lowest maintenance worker. And I will spend my life proving that compassion and wisdom are just as valuable as fire and fury. The arena stayed silent for 3 heartbeats. Then Ambassador Wells stood up. She began to clap, and the entire Earth delegation joined her. The Thalaxian Council rose next. Then species Danny didn't even recognize, all standing and applauding. It wasn't the thunderous roar that Vorten had received. It was something quieter but somehow deeper. Respect instead of fear. Danny watched with tears streaming down his face as half the arena gave Torvan a standing ovation. But he also watched Emperor Kale's face harden back into stone. And he knew, with a sinking certainty, that beautiful speeches don't always change minds. The Emperor's voice cut through the applause like a blade through silk. Vorten shall be my heir. This trial is concluded. Just like that. No deliberation, no consideration of what had just happened. Emperor Kale stood, and the entire arena understood the message. Power was power. Everything else was just noise. The crowd began to disperse. Danny watched Torvan walk off the arena floor, his head still high but his steps heavy. The young prince disappeared into the tunnels beneath the stadium, and Danny lost sight of him in the crush of bodies. The palace threw a celebration that night. Of course they did. Vorten was officially the heir now, and dragons loved any excuse for a feast. The main halls filled with nobles and diplomats, all trying to curry favor with the future emperor. Servants rushed everywhere carrying trays of food and drink from 100 different worlds. Danny was assigned to work the event, even though his shift didn't technically start for another 3 hours. They needed all hands on deck for something this big. He didn't mind. It meant he could look for Torvan. He found the prince 2 hours into the celebration, sitting alone in his chambers. The sounds of the party filtered up through the floors, music and laughter and the occasional roar of drunken dragons testing their fire breath. Hey, Danny said from the doorway. You okay? Torvan was staring out his window at the city below. I said everything right. I meant every word. And it didn't matter at all. Danny walked in and sat down in one of the chairs. It mattered to the people who heard it. I saw the council members taking notes. That human ambassador, Wells, she was recording everything on her device. But my father. Your father is stuck in old ways of thinking. Sometimes that happens. Doesn't mean you were wrong. Danny pulled out a small package from his jacket. My daughter sent this for you. Wanted me to give it to you after the trials. Torvan opened it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn picture. A small dragon with silver scales standing in front of a crowd of different creatures, humans, aliens Danny didn't recognize, all drawn in crayon with a child's enthusiastic detail. At the top, in careful letters, different is good. Love, Amy. The prince's eyes got shiny. She made this for me? Spent 3 days on it. She wanted you to know that someone on Earth was proud of you. Danny stood up. Get some rest, kid. Tomorrow's a new day. He left Torvan holding the picture like it was made of gold. The party was in full swing when Danny returned to the main halls. He was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen when the lights went out. Not slowly. Not with warning. Just instant, complete darkness. Then the explosion started. The outer wall of the eastern wing blew inward with a sound like the universe breaking. Screams erupted from every direction. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And through the smoke and debris, armed figures began pouring into the palace. The Kresh. Danny recognized their armor from security briefings. A rival dragon house that had been contesting territory with Emperor Kale for decades. They'd chosen tonight, when everyone was drunk and distracted, to strike. Plasma fire lit up the halls. Danny dove behind a pillar as a beam scorched the air where his head had been. All around him, people were running, screaming, trying to find exits that were blocked or on fire. The Emperor and his sons responded instantly. Torrents of flame erupted from their throats, turning attackers to ash. Vorton led his brothers in a defensive formation, creating literal walls of fire to push the Kresh back. It was working. The attackers were being driven toward the breached wall. But in their fury, in their need to destroy the enemy, the royal family had created a new problem. Fire blocked every exit from the eastern wing. Hundreds of guests and servants were trapped between the attacking Kresh and the defensive flames. Danny could see them huddled together, diplomats in fancy clothes, kitchen workers in their aprons, all pressed against windows that wouldn't break, doors that led only to more fire. He ran toward the trapped crowd, his mind racing. The service corridors. He knew every maintenance tunnel in this palace. 2 years of mopping floors and replacing light fixtures had given him a mental map of passages that most people didn't even know existed. Danny found Torvan in the chaos, pulling an elderly Verdani woman away from the fighting. The tunnels. Danny shouted over the noise. We can get them out through the maintenance corridors. Understanding flashed in Torvan's eyes. Show me. They ran together toward the trapped civilians. A plasma bolt hit the wall beside Danny's head, and he felt the heat singe his hair. Torvan used his small flames not as weapons but as light, creating a glowing path through the smoke. This way. Torvan's voice cut through the panic. Follow the flames. Stay low. Beth appeared at Danny's side, the human engineer who'd stood up with him in the arena. What do you need? The maintenance door behind that tapestry. We need it open now. She nodded and ran, pulling tools from her belt. Within seconds, she had the hidden door unlocked. Cool air rushed out from the corridor beyond, a path to safety. Organized lines. Danny shouted, falling back on every fire drill he'd ever participated in. Children and elderly first. Keep moving, don't stop. Torvan went into the smoke again, guiding people toward the exit Danny had opened. The prince's silver scales were black with soot. His wings were singed. But he kept going back, again and again, pulling out people who were too scared or injured to move on their own. A section of ceiling collapsed, blocking their main exit. Danny's heart dropped. But then he remembered the sub-level passages, the ones that flooded during heavy rain but would be dry now. This way. He led them down a side corridor, through a door marked with warning signs in 12 languages, down steps that hadn't been used in years. The passage was narrow. Built for maintenance drones, not crowds of people. But it worked. Behind them, they could hear Vorton and his brothers fighting. Their roars shook the palace foundations. But down here in the forgotten corners, a different kind of battle was happening. The quiet work of saving lives instead of taking them. Miguel from the kitchen appeared, carrying 2 small children whose parents were frantically calling for them. Rachel, another human worker, was helping a Thalaxian diplomat who twisted his ankle. People of every species, working together, getting each other to safety. Torvan was everywhere. Organizing, encouraging, going back into danger. At one point, Danny saw the prince carry out an unconscious guard who easily weighed twice what Torvan did. The young dragon's legs were shaking with exhaustion, but he kept moving. By the time they reached the eastern courtyard exit, they'd evacuated over 300 people. They emerged into the night air coughing and covered in ash. Behind them, the palace still blazed with combat. But here, in the gardens, people were alive. A young mother grabbed Torvan's claws and pressed them to her forehead in gratitude. An old man wept and called him a hero. Children clustered around him, and the prince knelt down to their level, making sure each one found their parents. Danny collapsed against a tree, his lungs burning. He watched Torvan move through the survivors, checking on everyone, making sure the injured got help first. The prince's fancy ceremonial robes from the trial were destroyed. He looked like he'd been through a war. He looked like a leader. What neither of them knew was that Ambassador Wells had been trapped in the Eastern Wing. She'd recorded everything on her communication device. Every moment of Torvan organizing the rescue. Every time he'd gone back into danger. Every life he'd saved while his brothers fought for glory. And she'd sent it directly to the Galactic Council chambers, where representatives watched in real time, seeing what true leadership actually looked like. Dawn broke over the palace with smoke still rising from the damaged Eastern Wing. The Kresh had been driven back, their attack ultimately unsuccessful. Vorton and his brothers stood in the throne room, battle-worn and victorious, accepting praise from military commanders who called them heroes. But in the eastern courtyard, something else was happening. Medical teams moved through the survivors, treating injuries and handing out blankets. Every single person there had a story about the silver-scaled prince who'd pulled them from fire, who'd known exactly which tunnel to take, who'd gone back again and again until everyone was safe. Danny sat on a stone bench, bandaging a burn on his arm that he didn't remember getting. His uniform was ruined, his face black with soot. But he was alive. And so were 300 other people who shouldn't be. Torvan was still moving through the crowd, refusing medical attention until everyone else had been seen. He stopped when he saw Danny and practically collapsed next to him. "You should get that looked at," Torvan said, nodding at Danny's arm. "You should sleep for about 3 days," Danny counted. "But I don't think either of us is great at following advice." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was almost beautiful, if you ignored the destruction behind them. "Your brothers are being celebrated as heroes," Torvan said quietly. "As they should be. They stopped the attack. And you saved 300 lives. Different kind of heroism, kid. My father won't see it that way." Danny opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by a palace guard approaching. "Prince Torvan, the Galactic Council has requested an emergency session. Your presence is required immediately." Torvan looked at Danny with confusion and maybe a little fear. What could they want? Only one way to find out. "Come on, I'll walk with you." The council chamber was smaller than the arena but somehow more intimidating. 40 delegates sat in a circular arrangement, with the Emperor's throne positioned at the head. When Torvan entered, still covered in ash and soot, every eye turned toward him. Emperor Kale sat rigid on his throne, his expression unreadable. Vorton stood beside him, looking confused about why his victory celebration had been interrupted. Ambassador Wells rose from her seat. "Prince Torvan, thank you for joining us. I know you've had a difficult night." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. "We've asked for this emergency session because the council witnessed something last night that requires immediate discussion." The hologram began playing footage. Torvan organizing evacuation lines. Danny breaking through doors. The prince carrying unconscious people through smoke. Children being reunited with parents. 300 souls emerging safely into the courtyard while battle raged elsewhere. The footage played in silence. When it ended, Wells continued. "We've interviewed survivors. Every single one credits Prince Torvan with saving their lives. They describe organization, quick thinking, knowledge of the palace structure, and most importantly, the courage to prioritize life over glory." A Thalaxian delegate stood. "The Draconian Empire has been a military power for centuries. Your species is respected for strength and feared for ferocity. But this has created concerns among council members about the Empire's trajectory." Emperor Kale's scales darkened. "You question our methods." "We question whether military might alone creates lasting stability," another delegate said. "The galaxy needs balance. We need voices that choose protection over conquest." Wells pulled up more data. In the past decade, draconian military incidents in neutral space have increased 40%. Trade disputes resolved through intimidation rather than negotiation have tripled. Smaller species feel threatened rather than protected by your presence. She looked directly at the Emperor. Last night, we saw two types of power. One that destroys enemies brilliantly. Another that protects the vulnerable with equal dedication. The galaxy needs both, Your Majesty. But right now, it needs the second one more. The chamber fell into tense silence. Danny watched from his position near the door, barely daring to breathe. Finally, a delegate from a species Danny didn't recognize spoke up. We propose the creation of a new position. Ambassador of Peace for the Draconian Empire. This individual would have full diplomatic authority, a seat on your advisory council, and the power to negotiate treaties and resolve conflicts before they escalate to military intervention. And you wish to dictate who fills this position? The Emperor's voice was dangerously quiet. We wish to strongly recommend Prince Torvan for this role, Wells said firmly. The council has voted. 37-3 in favor. Accept this proposal and allow your empire to demonstrate its commitment to balanced leadership. Or refuse, and face severe trade restrictions and diplomatic isolation. Danny saw Torvan's eyes go wide. This wasn't just about recognition. This was the Galactic Council forcing the Emperor's hand, using economic pressure to reshape draconian politics. Emperor Kale stared at his youngest son for a long moment. Emotions flickered across his ancient face, surprise, anger, reluctance, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of pride. The council presumes much, he said slowly. But I am not fool enough to ignore reality. If the galaxy wishes for my empire to have an ambassador of peace, then so be it. He looked at Torvan. Can you do this? Can you represent our people to species who may never respect us as they fear us? Torvan stood straighter. I can try, Father. And I'll do it with the same dedication I showed last night. Every life matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. The Emperor nodded once. Then it is decided. 3 days later, the palace prepared for a ceremony unlike any in draconian history. The creation of the Ambassador of Peace position had sent shockwaves through the empire. Some traditionalists called it weakness. But others, especially those who'd been saved from the Eastern Wing, called it progress. Danny wore actual formal clothes for the first time in years. His daughter had sent him a message that morning. Tell Torvan I'm proud of him. Tell him Amy says different is beautiful. Thousands packed the ceremony grounds. Danny stood with the human delegation, trying not to feel out of place among diplomats and nobles. Beth stood next to him, and Miguel, and Rachel, and dozens of other workers who'd helped that night. When Torvan received his diplomatic seal, he was supposed to bow to his father and take his place among the council. Standard protocol. Simple and formal. Instead, the young prince scanned the crowd until he found a familiar face. Torvan walked down from the platform, past shocked nobles and confused dignitaries. He walked right up to Danny Mitchell and pulled him into an embrace. You taught me that making someone laugh is stronger than making them fear, Torvan said, loud enough for the ceremonial microphones to pick up. You taught me that worth isn't measured in fire but in heart. You saw me when I was invisible, and you reminded me that I was more than my failures. Danny hugged him back, tears streaming freely. You taught yourself, kid. I just reminded you to look. The crowd started murmuring. This wasn't protocol. This was chaos. But then something unexpected happened. Ambassador Wells started clapping. Then the entire human delegation. Then the Thalaxians, the Verdani, species from across the represented galaxies. Even some of the more traditional draconian nobles joined in, moved by the genuine emotion on display. Emperor Kale watched from his throne. For the first time in decades, something in his expression softened. He'd raised warriors who could burn worlds. But this human janitor, with his card tricks and coffee and stories about a daughter named Amy, had raised something the Empire desperately needed. A leader who would build bridges instead of burning them. As Torvan returned to the platform to complete the ceremony, he caught Danny's eye one more time. The young prince smiled and performed one of the coin tricks Danny had taught him, making the ceremonial coin disappear and then pulling it from behind Ambassador Wells's ear. Wells laughed in genuine surprise. Then others joined in, nervous laughter at first, then real, honest mirth. The sound rippled through the crowd like water. That night, after all the official business was done, Danny found Torvan in the Eastern Garden. Their garden. The young dragon was still wearing his ceremonial robes, looking out at the stars. Big day, Danny said, sitting on their usual bench. Terrifying day, Torvan corrected. I have no idea what I'm doing. The Centauri famine situation alone is incredibly complex, and there are territorial disputes in 3 systems that... Kid, Danny interrupted gently. You'll figure it out. One day at a time. One problem at a time. Just like we did in those tunnels. Torvan was quiet for a moment. Will you stay? I know your contract was supposed to end next month. But I could use someone who'll tell me the truth. Who'll remind me why this matters. Danny thought about his daughter back on Earth. About his small apartment in Cleveland. About the simple life he'd left behind to push a cleaning cart through alien palaces. Then he thought about this young dragon who'd been invisible to everyone until someone finally saw him. About 300 lives saved because someone knew the forgotten corners of the palace. About a galaxy that desperately needed leaders who valued compassion over conquest. Yeah, Danny said finally. I'll stick around. Someone's got to make sure you don't take yourself too seriously. Plus, you still can't do that card shuffle right. We've got work to do. Torvan laughed, that warm, genuine sound that had been so rare when they first met. It echoed through the garden, mixing with the night sounds of an alien city on an alien world. And Danny thought about how strange life was. How a janitor from Cleveland could end up changing the course of an interstellar empire. How the smallest moments, sitting on a bench, sharing coffee, teaching card tricks, could ripple out into something that mattered. The galaxy had enough fire. What it needed was people brave enough to sit in gardens with the forgotten ones. To see worth where others saw weakness. To believe that laughter could be stronger than fear. Sometimes the greatest power wasn't what you could destroy. It was what you could help someone else become.